Hello, everyone. I am going to continue my readings of my novel, The Ecstasy and the Ignominy. And this is chapter 4. And this chapter is very different because this chapter is done in a somewhat different kind of style. It was done in the style of the character of Desmond Archer, who can at times be somewhat crude and somewhat violent. Now, he can be more poetic at times, but he has that kind of dual nature. Therefore, the language here is quite different than how I normally write. So keep that in mind while you listen to it. This is a new point of view character, so for this chapter, you don't actually have to understand what occurred before because it's a new situation that we're dealing with. So here is chapter 4, The Factory, Desmond's narrative. I never forgave my mother for never holding me in her arms. I came into this world drunk, and when I die, only then will I be sober. From the time I was a little child, I only knew barrooms, brothels, and shanty towns. My mother taught me to hate, my father taught me to kill, and the world taught me to covet. The preachers say the goal of life is to get to heaven. The atheists say heaven is to be found on earth. But do you know what I say? I say that heaven is like an absent father that you search for all your life, and when he finally knocks on your door, you realize that heaven was only ever a stranger who promised nothing. Smoke was everywhere, on the floor, in the air, in my lungs, and even in my thoughts. It consumed every aspect of my life, including my so-called soul. It was like toiling away in the very heart of a volcano, like being trapped in a never-ending fire. The concept of day and night meant nothing. One did not have time to think of beautiful things. The world had long since the world had long since vacated our thoughts. Day by day, even by the hour, we were poisoned in the name of progress. We could no longer feel the softness of the wind, the charity of green grass, or the gentleness of running water. The roar of the engine stifled all capacity for reflective thought. It was like being caught in a ferocious thunderstorm, one which would never end. Little by little, the storm tore away at my emotions, stripping them of all generosity. I could never block out the noises, the pesky bastards that stirred the cauldrons of my wrath. The sea of voices drowned out any empathy I might have had. Every voice was a parasite, and every chuckle, regardless of tone, was a disease that needed to be rooted out. Within their sordid faces, I no longer saw the beauty of humanity, but only the hideousness of God's sick imagination. The heat hit you like a stone wall. It made so nature felt like a long lost lover that was never truly yours. Within the concrete prison, smoke was our only reality, our only salvation. Peering into the heart of the blast furnace, I lightly trembled. The sun showed more mercy to the eye than the wretched inferno that was lethal to shadows. You could not help but be hypnotized by the flames, by the sparks that were like flickering stars. It was as if the fire represented life itself, and I was just a trail of smoke meandering through it. Wielding a shovel in my hand, I fiercely plunged the blade into the sea of white rocks, excavating the dolomite with an almost whimsical zeal. As if in a blissful sleep, the shining minerals rested on the blade, their exterior layers quite breathtaking. As I guided the shovel towards the sweltering flares, a tinge of regret caused my grip to falter. I realized that I, too, was an instrument for the world's fury. With every swing, every thrust, I was destroying beautiful things. As the fire consumed the rocks, even the heat cried for me. Sometimes the ugliest things in life can be the most merciful. Swaying against the ceiling, the lamps were like orbs of sunlight fading on a gray afternoon. We were always somewhere between heaven and hell, light and darkness. We were between happiness and sadness, joy and bitterness. In fact, there was no emotion or sensation that we ever truly felt completely and fully. We experienced everything in halves, half alive, half in love, and half sane. Every now and then I allowed myself to look up at the series of offices that were above the factory floor. The curtains were always drawn, always distant. If I didn't know any better, I would almost have suspected the factory was operated by ghosts. There wasn't any life in the windows. It was like being stared at by eyes that never opened. Of course, every once in a great while, Frederick Harris, God curse his soul, would peek behind the dusty drapes, like a viper stalking its prey. It always seemed like the worse looking I became, the better looking he became. Whereas his hair was like a patch of smooth snow, my bare scalp was like a forsaken wasteland. I was the price, it would seem, for his enduring virility. Frederick Harris represented everything I loathed about mankind. His rich daddy, the founder of the town, gave him all of the accolades he ever had. He didn't have to work like us, sweat like us, or bleed like us. He never knew what it was like to crawl in the gutter, to be a rat that will never taste the finer things in life. When you are only served garbage, you become garbage. You learn that morality is only as good as the next meal ticket, and that the moment the golden calf melts, civility becomes just another item on the menu of life. Out of the smoke, various faces roamed by, most of them, most of which were like specks of dust in the wind. They passed by without notice, without affirmation. They were like wandering leaves with no home, with no refuge. Their raiments were worn, disheveled, and weary of living. As with moths to a flame, the ashes clung to them with an almost ornery willfulness. Little by little, they were becoming part of the inferno that never ceased burning. Their minds, their very thoughts, were mere orchestras for the sweltering choirs. There was one face, however, that stood out among the rest. It was similar to a spring of shining water. It had an innocence that time never touched. It was an innocence that life itself had longed for, but could never actually embrace. His pale skin reminded me of snowy mornings, of frosty celebrations. His dark hair triggered images of wondrous nights, the only thing still worth living for. Forever 30 years old, he was the only perfect flame I had ever known. The moment he emerged from the smoke, all other concerns melted away, replaced by delicate infatuations. "You're late," I said, spitting on the floor. "I've been up all night. I took a very long stroll in the mountains. I almost didn't come here at all. Every time I step in this building, it feels like nature is only a distant dream. When you go the entire day without seeing the sun, the world becomes no more real than the mists that pass in the night," he whispered, turning his gaze towards the furnace. "Stop being a fucking pussy, Edward. You're beginning to sound like a silly girl. You think you're any different than the rest of us? We all wish we could go crying home to our mothers. Deep down, we're all just a bunch of spoiled kids in need of a throttling. This place reminds us that life is suffering. There aren't any free handouts, and if anyone tells you otherwise, they're full of horseshit. Anyway, that's what this world is, horseshit." "Well, you certainly don't hold anything back, Desmond. You wouldn't be you otherwise, I suppose. I won't deny that life is suffering, but suffering has many names and many faces. It is a coquettish courtesan that vanishes when the sun draws a curtain over the night. Sometimes it is a long-lost child that never felt the tenderness of a parental embrace. Most of all, however, it is a candle that will only burn when the eyes of the world sleep forever," he sighed. "That just sounds like sentimental hogwash. Why don't you grow up? Dreamers like you have gone extinct. Where I come from, that kind of talk will get your throat cut." I chuckled. Edward was as unchangeable and invariable as a brick wall. If my words had melted into drops of rain, his lips would have remained just as straight. He was seemingly unaffected by the weathers of earth and spirit. Colloquial phrases, whimsical or otherwise, were merely empty syllables to him. They were similar to cups without nectar, ravines without water, and mountains without snow. In short, they were the incomplete promises of wakefulness. "Desmond, I don't think you mean half the things you say. Oh, I admire your rugged spirit. I wish I could be as forthright as you concerning matters of the heart. It's just not in my nature, it would seem. In truth, I'm in need of a reprieve from all of this. I went up into the mountains to get more ideas for painting, my one and only true love. Art is the medicine that nourishes my very being. Nature itself is a work of art, Desmond. We are merely background decorations. And do you know what this factory is? It's a blemish on a canvas that God Himself shed tears upon, for they were the brushes that first brought light into the universe," Edward said. There was almost a supernatural hope in Edward's inflections. His sentences were passengers on the breathing flickers, seemingly an extension of their sparkling mysteries. His curling lips conjured images of two rivers emptying into a vast ocean. It was an ocean that had only tasted the warmth of forgotten summers, the brightness of clear horizons, and the freshness of evening rains. Beneath the waves, his gaze flowed with the optimism that I had not known since the bells of innocence ceased ringing. I wanted to bask in the waves, to cleanse myself of corruption, but deep down inside of me, I knew I would only ever be a copperous cloud hovering over his idealistic shores. You know, we don't have to take this shit forever, I muttered, tossing my shovel on the floor. What do you mean? Have you ever heard of Bertrand Shaw, the professor at the university that just opened up? I've heard of him, but I don't exactly know him. He's an Irishman, I hear. Well, I've been listening to some of the speeches he's been giving at the Playhouse. They're mighty interesting, let me tell you. I've never heard of such ideas. What kind of ideas? He's talked he talked of class struggle, of the plight of the working stiff, and about how we're all getting ripped off. We do all the work in this God-forsaken place, don't we? Why should one man, especially a good-for-nothing rich boy, get all the profit? It's the theory of surplus value, I think he called it. Of course, he articulates it better than I do. Tomorrow night, I think he's giving another lecture. We should go together, I said, lightly patting him on the shoulder. It's certainly true that we're lost in a sea of avarice and rapacity. Just by breathing, by feeling and being alive, the fevers of sight corrupt the purities of our souls, make them shallow and full of hollow dreams. That is probably why I envy the dead so much. Death is the only form of sleep that isn't haunted by nature's thoughts. It is an immaterial traveler that finds solace in quiet nothingness, in dreamless passions. You know what I think, Desmond? I think life is a neighbor that frequently passes you in the street, but never says hello, and then one fine morning you meet the immaterial traveler. He doesn't judge you or condescend to you. He's the friend next door who smiles at you every day, but this time you smile back, and all becomes silent. Is it really as bad as all that? Yes and no. I don't believe there are simple answers to the world's problems. Man is a flawed beast, and as such, he can't help but be tyrannical. Democracy or oligarchy, it's all the same to me. Why should the tyranny of the minority be any more concern to us than the tyranny of the majority? We assume that man is moral enough to govern himself, but I'm not so sure. As long as mankind is ruled by frivolous emotions, true liberty will remain elusive. Is it not better, given that fact, to endure the points and daggers of adversity? After all, things never truly change, they just fade away, he sighed. Edward's cheekbones rose and fell with a graceful poise. If his speech had been the wind, they would have been a pair of obedient snowflakes. His facial features, the prominent and the insignificant, were in complete harmony with one another. The fumes seemed to pass over him like a gentle broom. The fluttering glares, unusually delicate in their compositions, crafted his temperate gestures. The lines in his brow were as steady and unyielding as the fire itself. Sometimes it almost appeared as if they had been molded by the furnace, just as the heavens mold the sultriness of summer nights. The fevers of the past possess invisible hands, those intangible dexterities that shape our emotional masks. While my mask was sliding off, Edward's mask remained firmly ensconced within a prison of his own design. You just don't like change is all. It's probably why the boss keeps cozying up to you. If I didn't know any better, I would say you almost enjoy sucking up to him, I laughed, stomping my feet. We've only spoken a few times. I do what I have to do to survive, nothing more. It's odd, I will grant, that he wants me to come to his house tonight, I said, placing his thumb on his chin. I almost envy you. You'll get to see his pretty wife, I chuckled. Before the sound for wife could even leave my lips, I finally saw the mask falter. Momentarily blinded by some impossible fancy, his cheeks flushed with an elementary timidness, quite often in a state of peaceful apathy. His eyebrows slanted upwards, clusters of sweat trickling down the creases of his brow. Upon their curved pores, I observed a spiritual weariness. It had weaved itself into his very flesh. His pale skin, never so elemental as in that moment, gradually compressed. Its rigidity almost reminded me of cumbersome ice crystals. It seems like you fancy her, I said, elbowing his shoulder. It's not like that at all. But she is a charming woman. She's always been very kind to me. Why she had to end up with a man like Frederick Harris, I'll never know, Edward moaned, placing his hands in his pockets. She wanted the dough, of course. In that regard, all women are alike. Love could be served to them on a silver platter, but if the next guy has a sack of money on his plate, that love might as well be made of rotten meat, I informed, spitting on the floor. Somehow she's different. She's good. Well, don't bother with her, my good man. You'll only get into trouble. Why don't you come with me to the meeting tomorrow? That will take your mind off things. Perhaps I will, but the way I feel right now, tomorrow seems less tangible than the smoke we're inhaling, he declared, picking up his shovel. Edward's words were muffled by the rumbling of the furnace. In fact, it seemed like the entire world was muffled by it. The very center of reality was deafened. Much as it pained me, I had never truly known the gift of sight, of believing in something greater than myself. The engines, along with the infernal brooms, blackened the senses that were once a part of my nature. I had become a machine with a mind, with a soul, but like all machines, the old and the new, I couldn't taste the spices of wakefulness. They were less real to me than the whites of dusky tomorrows. And that is all of chapter 4. Hopefully, I will get to the next chapter, chapter 5, soon. Thank you for listening.